You're listening to the Studyclix podcast, the number one source for junior and leaving cert tips. We make exams easier.
Hi, you're listening to the Studyclix podcast. Welcome back to another episode. My name is Nessa. I'm joined today by Emer.
Again.
What's new?
Yep, we're back and we're here to talk about all things
Leaving Cert English.
leaving cert English. Yep. It's always the first exam.
That's right. English paper 1 is always guaranteed to be the first exam on that fateful Wednesday, first Wednesday in June.
But I think it's a good one to get out of the way as well.
Yeah.
Because it's the most amount of writing and
It sets you up for English paper 2 as well, which is a dreaded one among people.
yeah, I think both of them are
Timing-wise.
just pretty. Yeah. But it's good to get it out of the way.
It is very good to get out of the way.
Yeah, so
Settles you in. Eases you in.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about all things, English. So we're going to talk about the comparative, the composition, poetry, Shakespeare, etc., etc. We're going to give our advice,
Our tips.
our tips, try to prepare you, calm those nerves, maybe.
Make you feel a bit better about it.
Yeah, make you feel confident because it's definitely achievable. That H1 is, with the right tips and the right attitude, the right tactics, a H1 is definitely achievable.
Achievable.
It's achievable. It's definitely achievable.
So let's get to it.
Let's get cracking.
Starting off, Emer, I'll ask you, did you actually enjoy English?
No. I didn't like it because, and it wasn't the teacher, I had a great teacher, it was always a reasonably fun class. I just dreaded writing things. And this is true to this day. In college, I hate writing essays. I would much rather just sit an exam where I can
Right.
just, put all that information on a page. Whereas having to sit at home and spend hours thinking, how do I say this? Well, I hated it.
Writer's block, yeah.
Yeah,
You're kind of relying on your own creative juices.
Yeah, and I think that was my problem, that when it came to writing, I just wasn't that creative.
Right.
Where I thought that, English just really isn't my thing because I'm not as creative as other people. And it really wasn't that true, as my results showed. But I think that will hopefully maybe provide some people
A little bit of hope.
a little bit of hope that even if you're not creative, you can still get a H1 in English. It's all about those tactics.
It's all about playing to your strengths as well, especially when it comes to the composition. Like, choose the one that's right for you. I knew that I wouldn't be able to do a story because it involved coming up with the beginning and middle end, having all this, coming up with a story in a very short space of time. I knew going into it, the practicing, that I was always going to do an article or a speech, something that I could give more, that I knew the definitive structure of. So
yeah, I was the same.
play to your strengths. Know what you're good at and what you want to stay away from. So
I think that's the key to actually enjoying the subject as well. Because looking back on it, I feel like I look at it pretty fondly now because I'm like, oh, that was actually a pretty enjoyable class.
yeah,
I just dreaded it at the time, but I think if I had done that more and sort of realised what parts of the subject I enjoyed, it would have made it a lot easier for me to do the homework and sit in the class and so on. So if you're listening right now and you don't love English, maybe try and find parts of it that you do find enjoyable, whether it's reading or writing short stories or maybe writing speeches. You should hopefully be able to find something that appeals to you.
it's such a broad subject that you should be able to find some aspect of it that you enjoy. So focus on that, basically.
Yeah. So let's chat first, I guess, about the composition. It's generally the first thing students will do. It's the first thing on paper 1.
Yes,
And it can be a tricky one because it's long.
it is.
And I think sometimes it can be quite difficult because you have a lot of choice. You get a choice of 7 different things to choose from.
Hard to narrow it down, yeah.
Yeah, so it's, and maybe 2 or 3 of them appeal to you and then you're stuck. It's all about timing, obviously, in paper 1 and paper 2, everyone knows this. So every second that you spend thinking about what you're going to do, you get more stressed because you're like, oh, I'm wasting time, I need to decide.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's where it's kind of important to maybe, once you're going into the exam, know already which one you're going to choose.
Yeah.
Know what's your strongest points. For me, for example, I knew that I was going to do the speech.
Right.
There was no way I was doing anything else. And the speech came up consistently every year. I knew it was going to be there. So obviously not everyone is going to be able to know what they're going to choose. Maybe they're really good at 3 and that's great, fantastic for you. But do try and have an inkling, I guess, about what you're going to do to save yourself time.
I think it's really important also to not rush in. I know you feel like you're under a lot of time pressure, but it's so important to, once you choose what question you're going to do, make a plan before you write it out. Yeah. Take 5 minutes before you get into it so you know exactly what you're going to write. Just make just little bullet points, like points you're, okay, I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to conclude it with this, so that you're not wasting time in the long run. Like the 5 minutes that you use at the start will end up saving you time as you're writing it.
Yeah, because you might see a title and say, oh yeah, that's a great title, I'm going to start on that. And then you just start immediately and you do 1 paragraph and you've realised that you've actually said everything that you thought you could say.
Yeah.
And now you're stuck. You have 2 or 3 more paragraphs to write and you've got nothing. So yeah, planning is incredibly important.
I think there's a really good quote from The Office. It's like, I just start a sentence and I hope that I'll find it along the way somewhere like that. That people fall for that oh well, I'll just start like this and then see where it goes. In an exam, that's fine if you're at home and you have weeks to write out an essay, but it's not a good idea in an exam. You should make a plan.
Yeah. Unless you're incredibly creative and these juices just flow when you're in exam conditions, but you would be very lucky if that's your kind of person. So our top Studyclix tip is to plan.
And also I would say that if you're doing a story, and you can't think of an ending, do not conclude it with, I woke up and it was all a dream.
Yeah, our teacher said that as well. Do not do that. They hate saying it.
It just shows that you can't think of that you led it so far and then you actually couldn't think of a way to round it up nicely.
Yeah. But on the topic of stories, and just kind of with everything in the composition, regardless of what it is, whether it's a speech, an article, a story, or a descriptive essay, personal essay, there's always things about those different aspects that if you include these aspects, you will get the marks. So it's important, if you know which one you're going to choose, you need to know these aspects as well. So for example, if you're choosing a speech, you know that you should try and include maybe a rhetorical question, you should address the audience a lot, you should keep your register kind of formal. If you're choosing a short story, you need to be sure to include dialogue, you need to be really descriptive, use a lot of adjectives, create your characters. If it's a descriptive essay, it has to be really descriptive. Yeah. Obviously, personal essay, use more personal pronouns, etc. So
think about the examiner is going to be correcting it and they have a number of boxes they want to tick of things, like if you're doing a certain, say a speech, and they're like, right, we need to see this, this and this. Think about the examiner who's going to be reading your work and what they need to see for it to be defined as a speech or an article or a descriptive essay or whatsoever. It's actually a good idea to actually look up the marking schemes on Studyclix. We have them for English because it doesn't occur to people to actually look up the marking schemes for English because they don't have definitive answers, but it does actually show you what the examiners are looking for when they correct them. So yeah, I'd recommend that, so that when you are writing out your essays or whatever you're doing, that you know what the examiner is looking for so that they can give you the most marks possible.
Yeah. So then after the composition, you have to do your reading comprehensions. There's the question A, which is answering the questions to the text, and question B, which generally can be either an article or maybe a letter to the president or letter to the principal, various things like that. Again, the same advice, sort of know your strengths, play to them, and it's a lot shorter. So I personally kind of liked it. It was more fun. It was more about functional writing, and yeah, I felt like it was easier to just follow certain.
I think it's important to plan that too, because people are in danger of, because it's short, depending on your writing, it's not more than a page and a half, that you don't go overboard with it, because again, we'll bring it back to English. You always have to be sure of your timing, because it's very easy to run out of time in English. Just to know exactly, make a plan and just know when you hit a certain point. If you're watching the clock and say, okay, I have to start finishing it up now, just know not to go overboard and know exactly what you need to write in the time that you have.
Yeah, and maybe even set out, in terms of timing, first thing when you go into the exam, sort of set out a little, timer for yourself. So if you write in the top corner of the page, 11 o'clock, by the time it gets to 11 o'clock, I need to stop writing now and move on to the next question, and kind of be strict with yourself, show some discipline, and just cut yourself off maybe if that works for you. But personally, when I was using timing, that helped, or trying to
Fit everything in, yeah. No, it's crucial. You have to, it's really important not to run out of time. And even though you might feel like, oh no, I haven't finished it, I have to keep going, leave it where it is, move on, come back to it. It's the smarter thing to do.
Yeah, so actually, yeah, once that's done, paper 1 is...
That's paper 1.
It's pretty short, so, and once you're done, you'll feel such relief. It's the first exam. You realise, I can do this.
You can do this, yeah.
Only however many exams to go. So then in paper 2...
Paper 2...
It's kind of worse, depending on what you like, but I think most people generally... dread it a bit more because there's just so much to do.
There's so much to do, and to be honest, I'm waiting for it to be revised by the State Examination Commission because it's an atrocious,
it's
atrocious
crazy
amount of writing.
It's insanity. Even like looking back on it, and I think someone in a mature student was giving out that we had to write. It was something like 4 pages within 2 hours in one of our recent exams in college. And we were like, excuse me. He wasn't from Ireland, so he'd obviously never done the Leaving Cert. We were like, you've never done English paper 2. We had to write like 15 pages within 2.5 hours.
I remember.
Because that's it. When you add it all up, I mean, the Shakespeare can be like 5 or 6 pages. The Comparative can be up to 7 pages. And then you have to do poetry on top of that. It's outrageous.
I remember that the amount of marks equaled minutes when I was trying to time myself. The timings I gave myself like included being able to read over it again at the end. So I actually, in the run up to the Leaving Cert, I did time trials of just like, okay, I had a Sylvia Plath question and I had to know exactly what I wanted to write. There was no time to like actually think about my answer, and I was just scribbling, and my wrist was broken from trying to write so fast. So like it's tough. Everyone knows it's tough, but we've gotten through it. Yeah. Everyone's gotten through it, and you will get through it too.
Maybe buy a stress ball. A for stress, but B, it really trains your wrist.
That's actually great advice. Yeah. Did that just occur to you there?
Yeah. Because it's definitely an important thing to have a strong wrist when you're going into paper 2 because it hurts.
It is.
But you will get through it. Everyone does. Remember that.
Great to be ambidextrous going into the Leaving Cert. That if one hand gets tired, you can just start using the other hand.
That would be amazing.
That's not helpful though.
I wonder would it like change your, I don't know, your creative. I don't know. It's something about changing hands, like flip a switch in your brain,
like
and
the left hand side of the brain and the right hand side of the brain.
Yeah. Anyway,
we're going off topic.
So anyway, paper 2 is all about the stuff you've studied. So you've got the Shakespeare play, which in 2019 is going to be Macbeth.
Macbeth, yeah, if you're doing your Leaving Cert in 2019.
Yeah, and then obviously the poetry. Your school will have chosen different ones, your class, different poets, and then the same for the Comparative. You'll have chosen a different drama, novel, and film.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess let's kick it off on the Comparative.
Comparative was my least favourite, so I think I just got that. I didn't do any of the English paper 2 in order. I chose my own order based on what I want to do.
You're so edgy.
Not that, but just that, like, do it in the order of, like, what you feel better getting out of the way first, and then work, like, did you not do that in the Leaving Cert?
I don't know. I like doing things in order, actually.
Okay, well, yeah.
So I think I just did everything.
I think our teacher recommended that, like, you don't have to, as long as it's all there, it doesn't have to be in order. But I started off the Comparative anyway because it was my least favourite. I hated that there was so many marks going for it in comparison to poetry.
Yeah, 70 marks is a lot.
70 marks, yeah. And I felt we spent so much more time on all our poets in school, and then Comparative were just like, oh, here's these 3 things, compare them. Yeah. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. And the thing about, so with the Comparative, you can either choose the 70 mark question, where you just answer one question on the 3, and then you can do the 30 and 40 mark question, which you have to do both. Our teacher always recommended we do that one as opposed to the 70
the 30
mark
and 40.
question.
We did that too, yeah.
If you do the 70 mark question, then if you sort of lose track or go down the wrong route or not really answer the question properly, then you're going to damage a lot of those 70 marks. Whereas if you do that with one of the 30 or 40 mark questions, you'll only have done it with one of them. You might do really well then in the second one. So it's generally recommended to do that one. Also, there's just less to compare because usually it's just compare either the drama and the novel, or you choose which ones to compare.
Yeah.
So
It's nice to break it up anyway.
Yeah, our recommendation is to do the 30 and 40 mark questions, but obviously you do what you're comfortable with. If you prefer the 70 mark question and you're confident, go for it. The important thing with the comparative, the name is comparative, compare. You have to compare. If you don't compare in the comparative, you're just not going to get the marks.
Yeah.
So it's important to almost every line you write, make sure that you're talking about
something else in
something
relation.
and how it either you can talk about contrasting if you want as well, that's fine, but just make sure that you are linking at least two of the texts at all time. You have to prove everything, so back it up with evidence and make sure a quote would be lovely. Quotes are unfortunately really important in paper 2, so make sure you have your quotes for the 3 different texts and use them as evidence to back up what you've just compared. So it's kind of like, it's the same, I'm sure everyone has learned the PQE in junior cert English, point, quote, explain.
Times.
So make your point, use your quote and explain it. So make your point about how you're comparing it, quote it, and then explain how that quote shows what you just said. And once you have that, it's sickening, but the formula, it
works.
It's gold. It works. So just follow that, I guess, for the comparative.
Do you have any tips on remembering quotes? We'll come on now to like Macbeth or Shakespeare and poetry. There's so many quotes to remember in English.
Personally, I don't know if I literally just kept looking over them again and again, and I would sort of cover it with my hand and see, maybe I would look at the first word or something. Because our teacher was very helpful, and we did Othello for the Shakespeare play, for example, and she had made out a sheet for us. One sheet for quotes about love, one sheet for quotes about jealousy.
Oh, okay.
And then for homework, she would, along with other stuff, she'd be like, oh, and by the way, you have to learn all the quotes on jealousy. We're going to test it tomorrow. Yeah, so quotes, I think, are going to be different for everyone depending on how you remember stuff. There are a few different tactics that you can use. I personally didn't use it, but I feel like it could be helpful for some people if you record yourself reading out the quotes and then listen back to the recording. Or just have them all written out on a page, maybe highlight them. That might work for you.
Working with friends as well is a good one. Testing with other people.
Yeah, and I think actually a very important thing is, for me, I felt anytime I had to learn a quote that I personally didn't feel I was going to use because I didn't really understand how the quote made sense in the context, I couldn't learn that because I couldn't connect it to what I had learned from the text or from the Shakespeare play or whatever.
Okay.
So I think it's really important to make sure when you're learning a quote, make sure that you know why the quote is there, make sure that you understand the quote, what it means in the context, and check with yourself, do I understand this quote? Do I think I'll use it if I remember it? So I think don't bother learning quotes that you don't understand, because if you don't understand it, you're not going to be able to include it when you write it.
Yeah.
So that helps when learning quotes, if you actually know it and understand it and think you will actually use it.
Especially with Shakespeare, because Old English is kind of nonsense language. A lot of people might think that. So if you there's some cool resources on the internet about Shakespeare in modern times. There's actually a lot of movies that are out that are modern reenactments of Shakespeare stories. So just to know, if you look up Shakespeare quotes in modern terms, is what I'm saying basically, just know exactly what it does mean, and then that might help you when you are learning them. So you're like, okay, this is this quote in Shakespeare terms and this is what it actually means, but learn the Shakespeare quote for your exam.
Yeah, and also it's while we're on the topic of do's and don'ts for both the comparative and the Shakespeare, a big thing is not to tell the story. You've probably been told this.
Knows the story.
You've probably been told this a bajillion times by your teacher, but you will not get any marks if you don't give a discussion about your thoughts, why you think, explaining why you think what you do think, what you've just said. You have to give an in-depth analysis, discussion. It will not do to just give the plot of the story. They don't want that. They know what the story is. There is no point in you writing out 5 pages
about what is Macbeth.
About what it is. Even if, it doesn't matter if what you're saying isn't necessarily what everyone else thinks. It might be a really hot take on what Macbeth is really about, how it's about, I don't know. capitalism or something. If you can back it up and make it an interesting discussion and analysis, go for it. Because it doesn't matter it does matter a bit, because if you're just coming up with nonsense, that's not going to do either. But what I'm trying to say is, do not just summarize the book.
The examiner, like everyone, a lot of people just know the gist of Macbeth. What people care about, what examiners care about, is people's interpretation of it, because it is interpreted in lots of different ways, and you have to keep using, I felt this, it affected me this way, I thought about it like this, I. You have to keep bringing it back to you and what you thought about it. So make it, I know it sounds, I remember like having to, big thing with English was I just felt like really kind of nerdy saying a lot of things, especially about poetry, like, oh, it made me feel so sad inside, or it made me feel like, you're going to have to get over that. That's what
don't
English
worry about lying. I mean,
yeah, if you have to lie, lie.
Elaine Nicholanon did not personally affect me, but I said it in the exam because that's going to get me marks, and you just have to get over it.
Yeah, just be as nerdy and as weird sounding as you like. You have to do it for the exam, and then potentially you just don't have to talk like that again. So
Yep, and that's so true. Like I said, for poetry, you have to talk about your feelings. They absolutely adore feelings. So talk about how it made you feel, how it affected you, what your thoughts are on it. Always use I and me, and don't be general about it. Don't say one feels this. They want to know how you connected with it and what you thought of it. So
the examiner is going to be reading lots and lots of, correcting lots and lots of different papers, and they want to see something maybe like not so much different. They're going to be seeing the same things a lot, but just try to think of how it affected you personally and how you can make it your own. Make it what the poetry meant to you, what the Shakespeare, what the Macbeth meant to you. Yeah. Think about the examiner reading it, make it interesting.
Yeah, and if you can just kind of twist your opinion into something slightly original, something that will stand out, then that's going to get you extra marks.
Those sweet marks.
Yeah, so then basically there's just the poetry, which we've just touched on. Any other poetry tips, Nessa?
Poetry tips. I loved English, personally. I really, really liked English. It was one of probably like my strongest subjects in school, because I wouldn't say I'm creative, but I enjoy writing, but I hated poetry. Hate it. I didn't get it at all. A lot of people, I remember Plath was the big one. She always is, Plath. Plath was the big one when we were doing it, and having to talk about, oh, Plath made me feel this way and that way. I used to read her things and just be like, I don't get this. It's weird. Why do you write like this? Poetry is just, I'm just one of those people who just don't appreciate poetry or poets like they should be appreciated. But the thing is, basically, you have to read as much as you can about it. There's so many resources online. Studyclix specifically, go into English. We've put up lots of resources there about other people's interpretation of poetry, videos, backgrounds of the poet. There's a movie on Sylvia Plath's life that I kind of started watching because Gwyneth Paltrow was in it. Anything that kind of modernizes it for you, or just kind of that you can relate to, anything that you can do to help yourself is really important. I'm trying to think of who played her husband. Oh, it's not important, but anyway, yeah, like we said, there's always going to be aspects of a subject that you don't enjoy, and so find some way that you can make it relate to you. And also, don't be afraid. Again, I found my old English essays, because I was a weirdo who kept all my old stuff from school. And like, I hated the way of having to write like, oh, it affected me this way, and I felt so sad about this, and la 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 la. You just don't be afraid to spill your guts basically onto the paper. Just be as personal and be emotional as you can, because realistically, unless you're going to be doing something related to English in college, you won't be having to do that again. And if you are doing something related to English in college, it's great practice.
Yeah, and I think with poetry, again, like with the comparative and Shakespeare, quotes are a massive thing. Make sure to learn them, make sure to back them up. If you use them, say why you're talking about it, how it made you feel, why it's relevant in the context, etc., etc. So have all your quotes ready, make out different pages for different quotes for different poems. And a lot of people ask actually how many poems you should include, because there's a lot of speculation. Some teachers say that you should only do 3 and do more of an... Yeah, it's I've heard it range from 3 to 7.
Oh, man.
Personally, I think I fit in 4.
I did 5.
And
4.
did just fine. So I can vouch for 4 being enough. If you want to do 5, if you have time for 5, go for it. I would not do more than 5 poems.
Absolutely no more than 5, no.
But I would not do less than 4 either. I think 3 is maybe cutting it a bit short. So if you're worried about how much to write, I would generally go for 4. 4 is pretty solid. Try to do 5 if you have the time, but don't worry about it if you don't. Because the thing is, if you go for 5, then you're not really doing a proper analysis probably on the other ones, and you're going to lose marks for not having analysed and discussed the other ones enough. So 4 is a good one. And make sure to...
Quality over quantity.
Yeah. And a huge thing, not only with poetry, but also with the comparative, with Shakespeare, read the question. Oh my God, read the question. And make sure
it's a trap that people easily fall into because you have your own... Like, I know exactly what I want to write. But
make
then
sure... Make sure you're answering the question, because you can have an amazing analysis on Sylvia Plath or on Elaine Cullinan, but you mightn't be answering the question at all because you have it in your mind that you're going to do this one thing that you've learned, and then you do it, but it turns out you're not answering the question. They asked something completely different. They asked about her technique, but you've just talked for 5 pages about her background, or I don't know, I can't think of a concrete example right now, but it is so crucial that you read the question. And what I did for not only poetry but the other ones as well is I would try at the end of every paragraph, I would, once I've just made a point, I would link the point back to the question and like to reaffirm to the examiner. And this is how
a big one. That's all
Elaine
you need to do.
uses them. So just
It's
show,
that simple.
Yeah, show at the end of every paragraph that what you've just said in that paragraph links back to the question. And if you can show that, then the examiner can tick their little box that says, yes, they're answering the question.
Excellent.
Yes.
Would you have any tips on how to approach the unseen poetry then?
Yeah, that was always a tricky one.
I didn't like the unseen. That was actually, of all the writing I had to do, and even though the unseen has the least amount of marks going for it, I was very nervous about the unseen poetry because, like with English paper too, you're like, right, you can be fully prepared. Everything going into the exam you've seen already, except the unseen poetry.
Yeah, I think generally it's marked quite easily though, because examiners know, okay, they've had no experience with this, they haven't had time to go through it and analyse it with their teacher, they're not these like amazing English experts, so they're not gonna know straight off what it means, so they keep the questions pretty general. You can just talk about poetic techniques, talk about if there's alliteration or if there's an allegorical meaning. You know the drill, the different poetic techniques that poets generally use. If you can spot any of them, throw it in, show your knowledge. And again, because it's about interpretation, it doesn't really matter what the poet wants to say at the end of the day. Take your own meaning from it, back it up, and you should be fine with the unseen.
I think I found as well that even though I was dreading it, having written the comparative, the Shakespeare, the poetry really set me up for it, and then going into the unseen, I was flying it. I was Mrs. English. Like, it's...
Yeah.
That's a great metaphor. You can tell I did well in English, but having written all that really does set you up for it, and you're more confident going into the unseen, so I'd say that as well. It was helpful. Okay, so with all of the paper 1 and paper 2 covered, what would you say, Emer, are your top 3 tips for doing well in English?
Read the question and answer the question that was asked.
Yeah.
That's definitely a huge one that we just talked about there.
Don't ignore the question.
Yeah, you will not get the marks if you just blab. You can write such a good essay and think you did so well, but if you're not answering the question, you will not get the marks. So please remember to read the question properly and make sure you're answering the question properly. Repeat it in your final paragraphs every time. Make sure that the examiner knows that you are answering the question.
Very good. Tip number 2.
Tip number 2 would be keep it personal where it needs to be personal. So for poetry and Shakespeare, remember to keep talking about how you feel. It's all about your interpretation. Again, if you're doing the composition on something personal, like a personal essay, keep it personal. Like you said, don't be afraid to sound silly, because you don't actually mean this, it doesn't matter. Just let it go for the exam. No one's going to be reading it apart from the examiner. You're not stupid. You're not a loser. It's fine. Let go of your inhibition.
Everyone else in your class has to do the same, so don't feel weird about it.
Yeah. And tip number 3. It's hard to actually whittle it down to just 3 tips because the question or the paper is so broad. I think it would be to focus on your quotes.
Okay.
And I don't agree with it technically because I feel like quotes, there shouldn't be a big emphasis on quotes.
You have so much to learn for the Leaving Cert already.
Yeah.
And English is that one thing you should be relying on your own creativity, but yes, you do need to memorize quotes.
Yeah, so learn your quotes because it links back to the point of being able to explain what you're saying. So if you can give a quote and then explain it, it will work in your favour.
It helps,
so
yeah.
Work on those quotes.
Very good. Okay, and how would you suggest using Studyclix to help you for your English Leaving Cert?
I use our notes and resources. I think the top thing we get asked for in English is, do you have sample answers, sample essays? People want to see other people's interpretations on the poetry and the Shakespeare, etc. So check out our videos and notes pages. We have heaps of stuff, and if you're listening to this and you have good stuff to add, you can easily add your own resource, upload it to our page and help out some other students. That'd be great.
I was looking for resources on and I added one to the Studyclix page, which was like a cartoon, like modern version of Macbeth, and I studied Macbeth as well for my Leaving Cert, and it was really funny. So just find our resource sections. There's really it's not all like massive essays and really long-winded notes. Like there's helpful stuff in there. So do go look at our resources page.
Yeah. And if you can't find what you're looking for on the resources and the videos and notes page, then check out the discussion forum. You guys are all in it together to help each other out. So if you're looking for specific quotes maybe on something that mightn't be in our videos and notes page, just ask our little Studyclix, not so little, our large Studyclix community of students, like-minded students. They're just like you. You're all in the same boat. And not only students, we also have some great teachers there who are checking in on the forum.
Teachers are great for answering on the forum.
There to help you, so there's always someone there, And if not, you can give us a message, you can send us an email, info@studyclix.ie, or you can check out
there for those who ask for it.
Yes.
To quote Dumbledore. But don't be afraid to reach out, basically.
Yeah.
You'll find it.
And you can also find us on any social media platform.
Yes, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, or just search Studyclix, you'll find us. And if you want to add us on Snapchat, it's study_clicks.
Yep.
Add away, snap away.
Yeah, we would love to hear anything you have to say. If you have any issues that we can help with, give us a message. If you have any ideas for what you'd like us to talk about on the podcast, do.
Any suggestions for the
anything
site,
at all.
yeah.
We love hearing from you. We love hearing feedback. And don't be afraid at all to get in touch. We'd love it.
We do. We love that sweet feedback.
Yeah, so
if you could please rate and review us on iTunes, that would be great, because the more 5-star ratings and nice glowing reviews that we get, the higher it brings us up the charts, and it makes us, our podcast, more visible to other suffering students. And that'd be great if you could take some time to rate and review us. We would love it.
We would. And do get in touch, and until next time, it's bye for now.
It's goodbye.